16-year-old Liberty Wells is a shy, introverted girl with a passion for archaeology. She'd just spent her summer at camp, where she preferred reading over socializing with her peers. When the camp ends, her mom, Michelle, picks her up. Michelle, a writer facing a rough patch in her career, is lively and cheerful, quite the opposite of her serious daughter. As they drive home, Michelle tries to chat with Libby about her time at camp, even asking if any boys caught her eye. Libby, annoyed by the questions, gives short, reluctant answers without looking up from her book. After a while, Michelle pulls over and suggests Libby take the wheel. Libby reminds her she doesn't have a license, but eventually agrees to drive. As they near their lake house, Libby spots a for sale sign and is so surprised, she nearly loses control of the car. Michelle explains she's selling one of their lots to help pay for Libby's college. Libby then notices an expensive watch on her mother's wrist, which doesn't match their supposed financial troubles. Michelle admits it was a gift from her new boyfriend, who she wants Libby to meet soon. When they arrive at the house, Libby spots an attractive young man named John emerging from the water. She can't take her eyes off him. John greets Libby warmly and reassures her he won't intrude on her time with her mom. Once he's out of earshot, Libby asks Michelle why she hadn't mentioned him before. Michelle admits she wasn't sure the relationship would last. Later, John presents Libby with a small box containing an antique piece of jewelry. Knowing about her interest in archaeology, he gives her a bracelet with a Navajo life stone, a symbol of fertility. Libby is touched by the gesture. Usually one to wear loose, baggy clothes, she chooses to wear a beautiful open dress and comes downstairs in it for lunch. At the table, Libby asks how Michelle and John met. Michelle explains she arrived home earlier than usual one day and found John, a freshwater geneticist, studying various organisms in the lake. Intrigued, Libby asks John about his work. He explains that he specializes in freshwater species and is focused on helping them adapt to saltwater conditions due to freshwater pollution and global warming. Because of less rainfall and ocean evaporation, Earth's freshwater is turning salty and species are dying out. So basically, he's saving the world. Suddenly, John is seized by a severe coughing fit and gets up from the table. Michelle, worried, rushes to him. As he hugs her, he discreetly touches Libby's bare shoulder with his other hand, making her feel uneasy. Later that night, Libby lies in bed thinking about John. She decides to get a drink from the kitchen. On her way back to her room, she hears disturbing noises, cries and moans, coming from Michelle and John's bedroom. Libby cautiously approaches the door but hears a sound and quickly retreats, diving under the covers. At that moment, John, completely naked, exits the bedroom. After getting a drink of water in the kitchen, he pauses at Libby's door and watches her, mistaking her for being asleep. The next morning, Libby sees Michelle and John kissing in the kitchen. Feeling jealous, she deliberately interrupts them by walking in. She reminds Michelle that today is special, the day for their tradition of placing small tokens and notes for themselves and deceased loved ones into boxes buried in the yard each year. Libby suggests adding something for her grandfather, who passed away 9 years ago, but Michelle declines. This upsets Libby, who had a deep bond with him, unlike her mother, who didn't get along with him. Libby points out that Michelle had always seemed indifferent toward him, which is why he left the lake house to her. Overwhelmed, Michelle finally admits her father never loved her and completely abandoned her during the divorce. Michelle goes back inside the house, while Libby walks by the lake. As she tries to lift a rock, she gets bitten by a centipede. She's about to crush it in frustration when John appears and stops her. He explains it's a rare species and shows her that the centipede was only defending its offspring. He examines the bite, saying centipedes are poisonous, then gently takes Libby's hand and blows on the wound, making her feel self-conscious. "Looks like you're going to be okay," he says. Noticing Michelle seems upset, John offers to leave if he's causing any trouble. Libby asks him if he truly loves her mother and convinces him to stay. Back at the house, Libby finds Michelle looking unwell. She apologizes to her mother for her past grievances about Grandpa, and Michelle reveals that John proposed, and she accepted. Michelle confesses she loves him deeply, but wants to make sure Libby is okay with their marriage. Libby is taken aback by the news but finds the strength to be happy for her mother and wishes her well. Michelle hugs her daughter warmly and nervously warns her that John doesn't know her real age. He thinks she's around 35, when she's actually 42. Michelle asks Libby not to tell him, fearing it might jeopardize their relationship. Later that day, Libby accidentally catches John drinking his own sweat, which alarms her. Curious and concerned, she decides to explore the basement where John has set up a laboratory, hoping to learn more about him. In the basement, John meets Libby and shows her his research on lamprey, ancient parasites that can live in both freshwater and saltwater. He speaks with fascination about these creepy creatures, which surprises Libby. "You're kind of a weird dude," she says. John offers to help Libby catch new samples, and she agrees. At the lake, Libby asks John about his age and education. He tells her he's 30 and went to a small private school. Suddenly, Libby starts her period, and the water in the boat turns red. John quickly grabs his shirt and places it between her legs. His actions shock Libby, and he apologizes for his abrupt behavior. But then he licks the red liquid off his fingers, horrifying her even more. When they return to shore, Libby goes to take a shower. As she removes the bracelet John gave her, she notices a large red mark on her wrist where it had been. Suddenly, John enters the bathroom. He asks if she's okay, but doesn't leave right away. Instead, he starts sniffing her clothes and takes the shirt he used earlier. Libby becomes increasingly suspicious of John. Concerned, she tries to call her friend Marley to tell her what happened, but Marley doesn't answer. Libby then texts her, saying that her mother is marrying someone strange, and asks her to come over. Later that evening, Libby finds a sandwich with a note from John under her door. He apologizes for the earlier incident and assures her it won't happen again. Libby returns to her room and, looking out the window, sees a strange orange light coming from the lake. She watches as John walks into the water toward the light. Libby rushes out of the house, but by the time she reaches the lake, the light has vanished, and John suddenly appears behind her. She tells him she saw him enter the water, but John insists it's impossible since his clothes are dry. He explains that he suffers from sleepwalking and doesn't remember how he ended up outside. Despite his apology, Libby is skeptical and points out that if he were truly sleepwalking, he wouldn't have closed the front door behind him. The next day, Michelle's condition worsens. She asks Libby to go into town to get some medicine and a pregnancy test. At the pharmacy, Libby gathers everything she needs and then spots John outside with another woman. Panicked, she runs out to follow them, but the pharmacist catches up with her, reminding her she hasn't paid for her items. Distracted, Libby loses sight of John and the woman. When Libby returns home, Marley is already waiting for her in the living room. Libby asks her to wait while she checks on her mother, only to find John with Michelle. She gives her mother the medicine and hesitates to mention the pregnancy test with John present, but he reassures her that he and Michelle have already discussed it. Back with Marley, Libby explains John's strange behavior and the incident on the boat. Marley, concerned, advises Libby to tell her mother everything. But Libby feels it might be pointless since Michelle seems obsessed with John. So, Marley decides to take matters into her own hands and plans to tell Michelle about what happened herself. Later, Libby wakes up in her bed, confused about how she ended up there. She heads to the living room and finds her mom and John snuggled on the couch watching TV. She asks why they didn't wake her when Marley left, and Michelle says she was out like a light. Out of nowhere, Michelle casually announces she's pregnant and asks Libby to be supportive. Libby wants to know if Marley said something. Michelle gets defensive, blaming Libby for talking to her friend about it. She insists John didn't do anything wrong, even though he apologized. Libby argues that John's behavior was off, but Michelle gets upset, claiming Libby always messes things up. She insists John is staying, and even demands an apology from Libby. John tries to calm things down, reassuring them that everything's fine. As he hugs Michelle, Libby loses it and tries to pull her mother away, leading Michelle to slap her. In the heat of the moment, Libby reveals that Michelle is actually 42, not 35. John is shocked, his face turns red, and he rushes out of the house. Michelle is furious and asks why Libby has such a problem with John. She insists that John loves her, quirks and all, and that she's not leaving him. Later that night, Libby hears strange noises coming from the roof. She checks outside, but finds nothing. When she goes back inside, she hears shouting from the bedroom. Peeking through the door, she sees them in the middle of making love and notices something odd about John's back. Terrified, Libby spots the eerie glow in the water again. It vanishes quickly, prompting her to wade into the lake, finding nothing. She drives to the other side and, shining her headlights on the water, spots something that looks like an alien spacecraft. Horrified, she hurries back home. She tries to tell her mother what she saw, but can't find her anywhere. Panicked, Libby rushes to the basement and is horrified to discover her mother tied up and submerged in water up to her waist. Libby struggles to free Michelle, and as she does, Michelle realizes Libby was right about John, but it's too late to save her. Suddenly, Libby hears John's footsteps and hides. Listening carefully, she confirms that John is not human. He's some kind of alien creature. The floor is covered in salt water, and John's alien feet can't walk on it. His research on surviving in salt and fresh water wasn't for Earth's creatures, it was for his kind. Disguised as a human and wearing rubber boots, John approaches the tank where Michelle is and waits for the creature he expects to be born. However, when he sees the newborn, his disappointment is obvious. He takes the creature outside and then swallows something. Libby locks the basement door and rushes back to her mother. She tries to call the police, but her calls won't go through. Suddenly, John appears at the window, trying to convince Libby he wants to help Michelle. Libby notices a device blocking the signal and smashes it. Finally, she reaches the police and reports John as a threat. While waiting for help, Libby scans the room and sees Marley's lifeless body floating in the water. John manages to break into the basement, grabs Libby by the throat, and reveals his alien tongue. In a desperate move, Libby spots a bucket of salt nearby and tips it over onto John. He writhes in pain as the salt burns his alien skin. Seizing the moment, Libby rushes to her mother and manages to pull her from the tank. They escape the house but are soon attacked by something or someone. Some time later, Libby regains consciousness, bound in a strange room. In front of her are several men who look exactly like John. It dawns on her that the man she saw earlier in town was likely an alien too, one of many, using women to sustain their species. The alien creatures begin tearing down the walls. John approaches Libby and says, "We don't have much time." Out of nowhere, he expels a glowing orb from his mouth and transfers it into Libby's. She tries to resist, but John forces her to swallow it. Libby loses consciousness. She wakes up again, this time inside a diamond-shaped tank rapidly filling with water. Horrified, she sees other women in similar tanks, realizing that the aliens plan to use them to propagate their species. What do you think? How did these extraterrestrial beings end up on Earth? And why do they need offspring from earthly women for their survival? So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more videos.